Greetings, session heads. Welcome to What's in a Name Part 2. If you watched the Part 1, What's in a Name, you'll know that that was called the Saga of Grettir Martinsson, and that was about how my Martin guitar got smashed on a flight to Iceland and how I had to buy a replacement guitar, Kala guitar, suddenly in Reykjavik. This Part 2 is about a different name. The name in question this time is my name. Well, I go by Steve Weeks, but Steve is my middle name. My first name is actually John. So if it's something official or if I'm in trouble, I am John Weeks. So this is Part 2, the saga of John Weeks. It actually takes place on the same trip, though, this trip to Iceland. It starts on the return flight, though. So at this point, I now have two guitars to get back to home to Colorado. I've got my Martin, which was broken at the time, and I had my Kala guitar, which I had bought in Reykjavik. And I'm really, really nervous about getting them on the flight. I mean, I've already had one guitar smashed, and now I've got to get two on the flight. And the Kala, Grettir, was in a soft case. So I'm carrying one, my wife is carrying the other, and we're just so nervous about how is this gonna go, what's gonna happen. So I approached the airline attendant once we got on the plane, and I told her my sob story and what had happened, and just asked her, is there any way you could help me out? And she was immediately, of course, absolutely, you can't check those. She took them from me and put them in a closet and said, just talk to me. Just don't get off the plane with everybody else. Talk to me when the plane is clear. We'll get your guitars back to you. So first of all, huge shout out to the Iceland Air flight attendants, because I have flown Iceland Air several times, and every time I've gotten on the plane with a guitar and talked to an attendant, they've been kind, supportive, and helpful. And so a huge thanks to them because they've always just been great to me. So at any rate, I go sit in my seat with a huge sigh of relief. I'm in a window seat. There's a guy in the aisle seat on my row, but there's no one in the middle seat between us. So I'm just sitting there kind of relaxing, getting ready for the flight. And about the time we're supposed to taxi, they come on the intercom and say, hey, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't mind, there's someone who's trying to make this flight. They're on their way. And if they don't make this flight, they're going to get stranded in the Reykjavik airport overnight. So we're just going to wait for them. So we wait, and then after a while, I see this guy coming down the aisle, and he's got a guitar in a soft case. And he's trying to put it in the above head compartments, but there's luggage already up there, so he's not having much luck, but he's doing the best he can do. He's just trying to get it here, trying to get there. Eventually, the flight attendant comes over and says, oh, sir, let me just take that for you. We'll put it in the closet. You're fine. You just sit down, and we'll give it to you at the end of the flight. Again, thank you, Iceland Air flight attendants, for being supportive of musicians. So he plops down beside me with the same sigh of relief. Now, the guy on the aisle starts talking to him because it turns out that the guy on the aisle manages a guitar center in Denver. So they start talking guitars, they start talking about getting guitars on planes, they start talking about avoiding having your guitar smashed. And so eventually I chime in and I say, guys, I'm sorry to eavesdrop, but let me tell you my recent experience. And I tell him the saga of Grettir Martinsson. And he's like, oh, wow, you're a musician too. The musician sitting in the middle seat goes, you're a musician too. He says, I'm a musician, let me show you. And he pulls out a tablet, an iPad or some sort of tablet, and it's got a cover. And on the cover, there's lettering, and it says, the John Weeks Band. John Weeks Band, my name. So the guy sitting beside me is named John Weeks. So I can't believe it. I'm like, you are not going to believe this. So I pull out my ticket and I show him, because my ticket's official. So it says John Weeks. He couldn't believe it. He's freaking out. I'm freaking out. We are both literally beside ourselves. And so it was just a remarkable coincidence. Now, I had actually heard of him before, believe it or not, because once when I was playing in a brewery in Georgetown, Colorado, called Cabin Creek Brewing, which I need to go back there and play someday and do an episode on that brewery. It's really nice on a lake, and you can rent paddle boards right there and go paddleboarding right at the brewery. So that's more on that later. We'll do an episode on that. But at any rate, I pull up to the brewery and I'm loading in, and I see they've got a poster up in their window about all the upcoming music that month. And I see John Weeks, and I think, oh man, they got my name wrong. They used my first name. I can't believe it. And then I see the date and the date is from a week before, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've missed the gig. It was last week. I'm mortified because I think that I've screwed something up and I've shown up a week late for my gig. And then I see it right below that is Steve Weeks with the current date. And so I realized, wow, okay, so last week they had a guy named John Weeks. This week they're having Steve Weeks. What a crazy coincidence. I'm never gonna see a coincidence like that again, right? Now here I am on a flight from Reykjavik to Denver, and the John Weeks in question is sitting beside me. And to be clear, what makes this coincidence happen and what makes the story a story that I'm even here to tell you is, first of all, my guitar had to get smashed. If my guitar had not gotten smashed, they're talking about smashed guitars, I may not have chimed in. I may have just settled into a podcast or a movie and closed my eyes and enjoyed the flight. So my guitar had to be smashed in order for me to join in and let him know that I was a musician, or otherwise he wouldn't have shown me his name. Also, it was so coincident that the guy on the aisle managed the Guitar Center. Had he not been a Guitar Center manager, he might not have started talking to John about guitars and airlines and smashed guitars and whatnot to begin with. And also, John was, I think, on a different airline coming from Greece or somewhere, and his flight got jacked up, and so they just threw him on Iceland Air to try and get him home. So his flight had to get jacked up. So my guitar had to get smashed, his flight had to get jacked up, the guy on the aisle had to be from the Guitar Center, and John had to end up with the seat between the two of us for this story to happen. So an amazing coincidence, I think. So I thought you might be interested in that. As a traveling musician, you run into sort of just crazy stories sometimes. So I thought I'd share that one. John and I kind of follow each other on social media, just kind of keep tabs on what each other's doing. We always threaten to do a dual show someday and bill it as John Weeks featuring John Weeks. And then we can have like an acrimonious fight on stage as to who's featuring who. It'll be like the Gallagher brothers. You know, I came for the music and I stayed for the fight. Any rate, that's it. That's the saga of John Weeks. You can find him on social media. Sometimes he plays as John Weeks. Sometimes he plays as the John Weeks Band. I will tag him and put links to his stuff in this video so you can check him out. In particular, if you're in the Denver area, or he plays in the mountains. He's kind of like me. He travels around Colorado a good bit playing in places. So you can check that out and come out. And if you go see him, tell him that you've met the other John Weeks and you know the story. I'm sure he will be tickled pink about hearing that. So at any rate, that's it. What's in the Name Part 2? John Weeks, the saga of John Weeks. All right, later guys.